Okay guys, in this video we're going to have a look at the sine rule. So in lessons you would have seen this triangle here where the angles A, B and C are in capitals and the opposite lengths, so in this case the angle A, opposite that is lowercase a, capital B, opposite that length is lowercase b, and then angle C in capitals, opposite that is lowercase c. Okay, so that is the setup when I'm talking about this formula here. So there's two different ways you can use the sine rule. The first one, if you're trying to find an angle, we use this one where the angle is on top, so the angle A, B or C, we use this formula. And for finding the length, you just flip it round so the lengths are on top. Okay, so depending on what you're trying to find, if it's a missing angle, use that one. If it's a missing length, use that one. Okay, it just makes things a little bit easier. So let's get stuck in and do a few questions and examples so you can see how to do it. So in this particular case, I'm trying to find out the angle. So if I'm trying to find out the angle, I'm going to use this formula here. Now, although this is a formula, because I only have two sides and I'm only dealing with two angles, I actually don't care about that bit. All I'm going to use is this bit here, where A is the angle, B is the angle, lowercase a is the length, lowercase b is the length. Okay, so let's substitute it in and see what we got. So I've got sine and an angle. Let's use this angle there, which is 50. Now let's start with x, actually. Let's start with x. Doesn't matter either way. Let's start with x. And then I want the length opposite. So if that's the angle x, I want 5. So I divide by 5. Then that is equal to sine b. Well, sine 50 is my other angle. So sine 50. And the length opposite that is 7. Okay, so that's how I set it up using that formula. Because I want the angle, I use this one, and I fill in the angle there, 50, and opposite 50 was 7, so there's the length 7, there's my angle x, and opposite that was 5. Okay, all we do then is a little bit of rearranging. Well, currently I'm dividing by 5. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to get rid of it and times both sides by 5, which will leave me with sine x equals 5 sine 50 divided by 7. And I don't want sine x, I just want x on its own. So again, if you've done trig with missing angles, or when you do the inverse of sine, this is exactly the same thing. So if sine x, I don't want the sine, so I inverse sine. And then obviously when I take over this side, I then got 5 sine 50 all divided by 7. So what does that look like in the calculator? Well, let's have a look. Inverse of sine is shift sine, so you got that little -1. And then in there I got 5 sine 50. Don't forget, if you press the sine button, you might have opened a bracket, so close it after you finish with the angle, otherwise you'll get the wrong answer. And then I'm dividing by 7, so divide by 7. And again, because I did inverse sine, it opened a bracket, so at the very end, I'm going to close my bracket, which is basically just that one there. Press equals, what do we get? I get 33.17. So to one decimal place, let's call it 33.2. And because it's an angle, I need to say degrees. Okay, let's do another example just to make sure that everyone's happy. Again, I've got a missing angle, which is x here. So I'm going to be using this one here where the angles are on top. Let's substitute in what we know. So sine x, and the length opposite x is 8. So I divide by 8. That is equal to, I've got angle 38, so sine 38 divided by an opposite, that one is 11. Okay, so that's how we set it up. So again, I don't want to be dividing by 8, so I'm going to times both sides by 8 to get rid of that. So I will have sine x equals 8 sine 38 all divided by 11. And again, I don't want that sine there, so I'm going to inverse sine both sides. So x equals the inverse of sine, and then in brackets, this whole thing here, 8 sine 38 all divided by 11. So I'll bring back my calculator and substitute that in. So to get the inverse sine, it's shift sine, and again it's opened up a bracket. So 8 sine 38, again I want to close that bracket around the 38, then I divide by 11, and I close the whole thing off with the bracket, press equals, and I have x to equal 26.59. I'll round that to 1 decimal place and call it 26.6 degrees again because it's an angle. Okay, so that's a couple of examples of how to work out a missing angle using the sine rule. And if I flip it over, we'll have a look at some examples of how we find a missing length. Now, because we're after a missing length, I'll just go back again. We're going to be using this formula here, where it's just that one, but flipped over. Okay, so let's substitute in what we know. Well, I'm after length x there. So I divide that by sine, and I want the angle opposite x, which in this case is 50, so that's sine 50. And that is equal to the length 7, and opposite that is angle 35, so it's sine 35. Okay, so that's the setup. Now I'm currently dividing by sine 50. I don't want that. I do the opposite, so I times by sine 50. Obviously both sides. And that leaves me with x equals 7 sine 50, all divided by sine 35. So actually this one's a little bit easier. So I'm going to bring back my calculator and just type it in. So 7 sine 50, don't forget to close that bracket around the angle, divided by sine 35 in this case. Again, don't forget to close the bracket around the angle. Press equals, and we get 9.34. And I'll round that to 1 decimal place, so 9.3. Now, because it's a length, and that's in centimetres, that will also be in centimetres. So one more example of a missing length. There's the missing length that I want. So I divide that by sine and the opposite angle, which in this case is 21. That is equal, well, that length there is 9. Opposite angle is 64, so sine 64. So that's how we set it up. A little bit of rearranging. Again, I'm dividing by sine 21, which I don't want to do, so let's times by sine 21 to get rid of it from this side. But don't forget to do it to both sides. In which case I have x equals 9 sine 21, all divided by the sine 64, which is already still there. And when I put it into my calculator, 9 sine 21, close the bracket round the angle, divided by sine 64, close the bracket round the angle, I get 3.58a, and so on. So I'm going to round that to 1 decimal place, so the 8 rounds that to a 6. So 3.6, again, centimetres, because it's a length. Okay, so there's 2 examples of how to find a missing angle, 2 examples of how to find a missing length. So hopefully that helps. Cheers, guys.